Smoke still rose from the blackened beams when the widow rode up alone. Everyone else had already turned their horses away. The bankman, the neighbors, even the sheriff. All of them had looked at what remained of the Calloway ranch and called it finished. Burned fences, a collapsed barn, ash where a house used to stand. But Sarah Calloway did not turn away. She sat still in the saddle, staring at the wreckage. And for the first time in 3 days, she almost smiled. What did she see in those ruins that made every other person in that county look like a fool? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand why some of the most broken places hide the things people spend a lifetime searching for. This is the story of a ranch that everyone thought was worthless, and the one woman who refused to believe them. It was the late 1870s in the dry hill country of West Texas, where ranches lived and died by rain that rarely came, and by men who rarely forgave a debt. Sarah Calloway had buried her husband, Thomas, only 4 months earlier. He had died the way most men died out there, not in a gunfight, not in some grand act of violence, but quietly, of a fever that came on fast during a hard winter and never let go. She had knelt beside him at the very end, in a one-room house with a dirt floor, and made him a promise. She would not let the land go. Not to the bank. Not to his cousin, who had already ridden in twice asking about helping her sell. 3 days before she arrived at the burned house, a fire had swept through in the middle of the night. Nobody could say for certain how it started. Some blamed a lightning storm that passed through without rain. Others whispered that it was no accident at all. But here is where it gets strange. The fire took the barn. It took the fences. It took the small bunkhouse where 2 ranch hands had been sleeping. Thankfully, both men escaped with only smoke in their lungs. Yet the fire did something almost impossible. It stopped, as if by design, exactly 10 feet from the old stone well at the center of the yard. And it left behind, half buried in ash and blackened wood, marks nobody in town could explain. The neighbors came first out of curiosity, then out of pity, and finally, out of judgment. A rancher named Otis Pruitt stood at the edge of the property with his hat in his hands and told anyone who would listen that Sarah Calloway was a woman chasing ghosts on a dead man's land. The bank had already sent notice. 90 days, they said, to pay what was owed, or the ranch would be sold at auction to the highest bidder, likely Pruitt himself, who had wanted that stretch of land for years. But here is the secret nobody in that town understood. Yet, Thomas Calloway had not been a careless man, and what he left behind in that fire was not destruction. It was a message. If you're the kind of person who believes some places are cursed and others are simply misunderstood, tell me in the comments, because Sarah Calloway was about to prove which one this was. She dismounted at the edge of the yard, her boots crunching into a layer of ash still warm beneath the surface. She walked past the collapsed barn without stopping. She walked past the burned-out bunkhouse without stopping. She walked directly to the stone well that the fire had somehow spared, knelt down, and pressed her palm flat against the old stones. Her late husband had built that well himself 4 years earlier, using stones hauled from a dry creek bed nearly 15 miles away. At the time, she had asked him why he wasted so much effort on stones that plain when there were closer ones available. He had only smiled and told her, "Some things you build so they last longer than you do." She hadn't understood what he meant, not then. But 3 nights before the fire, Thomas's old ranch hand, a quiet man named Amos Whitfield, had come to her in secret. He told her something that Thomas had confided to him alone, sworn to silence unless something happened to Thomas first. Thomas had been afraid of the bank, afraid of Pruitt's growing hunger for the land, and afraid that if anything happened to him, Sarah would be left with nothing but debt. So he had prepared something. Something buried. Something that only she would know how to find. Because only she knew the story he used to tell her at night about his grandfather and about a promise made in another burned home decades earlier, far to the east, back when the family had lost everything once before and vowed never to be caught unprepared again. And if you've ever wondered whether people from that era were truly capable of thinking 3 steps ahead of ruin, wait until you hear what Sarah found beneath those stones. She worked through the afternoon, her hands blistering as she pulled away the loose stones near the base of the well, each one heavier than the last. The 2 ranch hands who had survived the fire, Amos and a younger man named Eli, came to help her once they realized what she was doing. Neither of them asked questions. Neither of them dared to hope out loud. Eli, barely 19 years old, kept glancing at the sky, worried the light would fail before they finished. "Ma'am," he said quietly, wiping soot from his hands onto his trousers. "What if there's nothing down there? What if it's just an old man's habit, building things deep for no reason?" Sarah didn't stop working. "Then we'll know that too," she said. "But I watched my husband build this well stone by stone. He never did anything without a reason, not once in 9 years of marriage." Amos said nothing at all. He simply kept pulling stones, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the widening gap beneath the well's foundation. He had known Thomas longer than either of them, had ridden with him before Sarah ever came west, back when Thomas was still a younger, harder man, trying to build something out of nothing in unforgiving country. Amos remembered the day Thomas first mentioned building the well, the deep way, using stone instead of the cheaper timber lining most ranchers used. At the time, Amos had thought it foolish. Now, kneeling in the ash beside the widow, he understood. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow fall toward the western ridge. Sweat mixed with soot on Sarah's forearms. Her knuckles bled from 3 separate stones that had refused to give easily, and still, she did not stop. But here's the moment that changed everything. As the sun dropped low over the hills, painting the burned yard in a strange orange-gold light, Sarah's fingers struck something that was not stone. It was iron. A small strongbox, wrapped tightly in oiled canvas to protect it from moisture, wedged into a hollow beneath the well's foundation. A hollow that had clearly been built there on purpose, long before the fire, long before anyone thought to look. Her hands were shaking as she pulled it free. Inside were not riches in the way people in town would later gossip about. There was no chest of gold coins, no forgotten treasure map. What Sarah found was something far more valuable to a woman standing on the edge of losing everything. Legal deeds to 2 additional plots of land Thomas had quietly purchased under a different name years earlier. A modest but real amount of saved silver dollars wrapped in cloth, and a letter written in Thomas's own hand, addressed simply to "My Sarah." In that letter, Thomas explained everything. He had seen the way Pruitt looked at their land for years. He had heard the rumors, the same way any careful man hears the wind change before a storm. And rather than tell Sarah and risk her worrying herself sick, he had quietly built a second future for her, hidden where only their private history together would lead her to look. He wrote that if she was reading this letter, it meant something had happened to him, and that he needed her to know one final thing before anything else. He had never once doubted her strength to survive without him. He wrote about the first winter they had spent together on that land, when a blizzard trapped them inside the small house for 11 days straight, and they had run so low on food that Sarah had rationed their last sack of flour into portions smaller than her own 2 hands. He told her he remembered watching her divide that flour, calm and steady, never once complaining, never once asking him to fix what neither of them could fix. That was the day, he wrote, that he stopped worrying about what would happen to her if the worst ever came. He also wrote something Sarah had never known. Long before they met, his family had lost a homestead back east to a fire nearly identical to the one that would one day take their barn, set deliberately by a neighbor hungry for land back when Thomas was still a boy. His own father had never recovered from that loss and had died, believing the world simply took from good people without reason or warning. Thomas wrote that he had spent his whole life determined not to repeat his father's mistake. He would not leave his family unprepared, no matter what it cost him in secrecy or worry carried alone. Sarah read that part twice, her hand pressed against her mouth, understanding for the first time the shape of the fear her husband had carried silently for years, disguised behind an easy smile and a steady hand. If a letter like that doesn't tell you everything about the kind of man Thomas Calloway was, I don't know what will. And if you believe love like that still exists, let me know down in the comments, because we're only halfway through this story. The following morning, word had already spread through town, as word always does in places that small. Otis Pruitt rode out to see for himself, expecting to find a grieving widow ready to sign away her land out of exhaustion. Instead, he found Sarah Calloway standing at the edge of her scorched property, with the deeds in her hand and a look on her face that made him stop his horse 30 feet away instead of riding closer. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She told him plainly that the land was not for sale, that the debt to the bank would be settled in full within the week, and that she would be rebuilding, not just the barn, not just the bunkhouse, but expanding onto the 2 new plots her husband had secured before his death. Pruitt's face went pale, then red, then pale again. He stammered something about the fire, about how convenient it was that she'd found something so quickly after losing everything, as if suspicion could somehow undo what was already sitting in her hands, signed and legal. But here's the twist nobody in town saw coming. The sheriff, a weathered man named Garrett Boone, had quietly been investigating the fire since the night it happened. And what he found in the days following Sarah's discovery lined up with something deeply troubling: tracks near the property line. A torn scrap of fabric caught on the busted fence rail, matching a coat sold only at one general store in the entire county. And a witness, a young boy who had been out checking rabbit snares before dawn, who had seen a rider leaving the Calloway property in a hurry, just before the flames were first spotted from town. The description of that rider matched one man closely enough that Sheriff Boone rode straight to the Pruitt ranch that same afternoon. Do you think a man like Pruitt would burn a neighbor's home just to buy the land cheap afterward? Tell me your theory in the comments, because what happened next surprised even Sarah. Pruitt denied everything, of course. He claimed he'd been home all night, that the boy was mistaken, that the fabric could have come from anywhere. But under pressure, and faced with the very real possibility of a trial in the territorial court, one of his own hired men finally broke. He admitted that Pruitt had ordered the fire set deliberately, not to kill anyone, he insisted, only to scare the widow into selling quickly, before she had time to think clearly or seek help. It had nearly worked. If Thomas Calloway hadn't planned 3 steps ahead of his own worst fears, it would have worked perfectly. Pruitt was arrested within the week. His ranch, ironically, was the one auctioned off not long after, once the legal costs and fines caught up to him. And Sarah Calloway, the woman everyone had written off as finished, became something else entirely in that county's memory. The widow who looked at a pile of ash and saw exactly what she needed to survive. By the way, if stories like this, about ordinary people who refuse to be broken by tragedy, are the kind of thing you want more of, this is exactly the channel for you. Hit that subscribe button now, because we bring you a new one of these every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Rebuilding took the better part of a year. Sarah didn't do it alone. Amos and Eli stayed on, joined eventually by 2 more hands once word spread that the Calloway Ranch was against all odds, thriving again. The new barn went up wider than the old one. The bunkhouse was rebuilt in stone this time, not wood, at Sarah's insistence. She wanted nothing on that land that could burn so easily again. There were hard days in that year, plenty of them. A drought in the early spring threatened the new fences before they were even finished. One of the hired men quit after only a month, convinced the widow's land carried bad luck, despite everything that had already been proven otherwise. Money from the strongbox ran thinner than expected, once lumber costs and legal fees were paid. But Sarah kept a small ledger by lantern light every evening, the same way Thomas used to. And every evening, the numbers came out just enough to keep going 1 more week. Eli, the young hand who had once doubted there was anything buried beneath the well at all, stayed on for the better part of 6 years before starting his own small spread 2 counties over. He would tell people for the rest of his life that the day they pulled that strongbox from the ground was the day he stopped believing hard work alone was ever enough. That sometimes it takes a person willing to keep believing when everyone else has already walked away. And the well, the one the fire had strangely spared, the one that had held Thomas's final gift to her, Sarah never filled in that hollow beneath its stones. She left it open, empty now, but she visited it most evenings anyway, sitting beside it as the sun went down, the same way she once sat beside her husband. People in town started calling it Widow's Well. Not out of pity anymore, out of something closer to respect. Sarah Calloway lived on that land for the rest of her life, and the ranch passed down through her family for 2 more generations after her. To this day, some old-timers in that part of Texas still tell the story a little differently depending on who's telling it. Some say the fire really was an act of fate, protecting what needed to be protected. Others say it was simply a desperate man's plan gone wrong, saved only by a dead man's foresight and a widow's refusal to give up. Either way, one truth remains the same in every version of the story. Everyone else saw a burnt-out ranch with nothing left. Sarah Calloway saw exactly what she had been looking for. If this story moved you even a little, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and let us know what you think really happened that night. Was it fate, or was it planned? We read every single comment, and we'd love to hear your take. This video is an artistic recreation created with the help of artificial intelligence, developed independently for entertainment purposes. The characters, events, and details presented are fictional interpretations inspired by the folklore of the era. For accurate historical information, please consult official historical sources.